All right, folks, so we made it to the end of the course. The very last unit that we're on is ecology. And you're going to like ecology because ecology is really, really simple. And probably you know a lot of it from previous grades at school. So let's get started. The first thing that you need to understand is your textbook has a really crappy definition of ecology. So what I've included here for you is what I think is a better, more complete definition of ecology. This is more of the college book definition, and it's the study of the distribution, abundance, and interactions of organisms within their environments. Okay, so you're studying distribution. This is how many, or excuse me, where you would find the individuals in an area. Okay, so where are they? The abundance, how many of them you're going to find. Okay, and distribution and abundance go with population study. Okay. Interactions is pretty self-explanatory, and then you've also got environments here, right? So there's three important pieces there. You've got population study, which is distribution and abundance, and then you've got interactions in the environments. And you're looking at the interactions between organisms, but also the interactions between organisms and their environments in ecology. So all of that is covered under ecology. Now, in case you haven't noticed, ecology is a pretty vocabulary-heavy topic. It's not that this is difficult, but there are a lot of terms that you have to know. So this first introductory lesson is going to go over a bunch of those terms. And the first thing we're going to talk about here, just really quickly, is just introduce environments. And environments are going to include abiotic and biotic factors. They're going to impact organisms. Abiotic factors are things that never lived, like water, rocks, weather, soil, stuff like that. Biotic are things that live currently or once lived but are now dead. Okay, so that would be the organisms in the area, including plants. Don't forget about plants. Those are organisms, microbes, as well as animals and fungi and algae and things like that. Environments can be characterized based on these factors. In other words, you're going to find these predictable patterns of living and non-living and never-lived things in environments. So, for example, if I said desert to you, you get a very distinct picture in your mind of what a desert looks like. Now, there are several different types of deserts. Some of you are thinking about the kind that have cactuses and tumbleweeds. Others of you might be thinking about a sandy desert like the Sahara. But the point is, you've got a predictable pattern of weather on a desert. You've got predictable kinds of organisms. You've got a predictable type of soil in a desert environment, right? And that's what we're talking about. Environments also have niches and habitats. And I purposefully cut off habitat because I didn't have enough room. And honestly, I figured most of you know what a habitat is, right? The habitat is the place in the environment where the organism lives. That's what got cut off at the bottom. That's the organism's house, is its habitat. What's probably new is the concept of a niche. And a niche is a role that an organism plays within the environment. So in other words, it includes the habitat, but also all of the interactions that it has within its habitat. And that's a little bit different definition than habitat. So for example, your habitat for you would be your house, wherever you live, but your niche within your habitat would include not only the fact that you live in your house, but maybe you're the person who takes out the trash, or the person who does the dusting, or who cooks dinner. You're somebody's child. Maybe you're their son or daughter. You might be a grandchild. You might be an aunt or an uncle. All of those things imply the role that you play within that habitat as well. That would characterize your niche. What's important is that niches are unique to the organism, so only one kind of organism can occupy each niche. Just like there's only one you're the only one who could fill all of the roles that you fulfill in your house. The same thing happens in nature as well. So if two organisms attempt to try to occupy the same niche, what's going to happen is competition, and then somebody's going to have to die or somebody's going to have to leave. Because you can never share a niche. All right, before we jump into populations, one more quick intro to ecology, just looking at the hierarchy of ecology. This is the levels at which we can study. You can look at individual organisms, right, within the hierarchy. You can study that in ecology. When you start adding organisms of the same species together, we call that a population. Okay, so populations include all of the humans in an area, or all of the deer in an area, something like that, or even all of the oak trees in an area is a population. When we talk about a community, we're talking about organisms of different species. So notice organism is included in a population. Populations are included in communities, and that's how this hierarchy works. So when you put several populations together, you get a community. Notice too that this is a different kind of definition than the sociological definition of community. When a sociologist talks about community, they're talking about, say, all the people that you go to work with, you go to school with, you go to church with, people in your neighborhood, and so on. But notice that's all people, right? A biologist would call that not a community. A biologist would call it a population because it's all the same species. Communities in biology have to include different species. So it would include the squirrels and pets in your neighborhood, plus the human beings, plus the trees and the grass, and all of the things that are alive in your neighborhood. Okay? Ecosystems are all of the communities in an area, plus abiotic factors, so weather patterns, soil, rocks, stuff like that. Biome, this one I don't think is on your notes. You can leave that out if you'd like. This is really just a big ecosystem, but then the biggest step in the hierarchy of ecology is the biosphere, and this is the entire area available for life on the planet, and that includes all the way at the bottom of the ocean, all the way up to the lower levels of the atmosphere. So it's not just a horizontal area on land, it's also a vertical area down in the water column and up into the atmosphere. Okay, so we're going to start kind of backwards. If you're looking at these notes in Blackboard or Edmodo, the PowerPoint kind of goes backwards. We're going to start with population. So we're going to start at the top of the hierarchy of ecology with demography. And demography is the study of populations over time. And you're going to do a demographic study in class. So you're going to get an idea of what these calculations and things look like. So a demographer is somebody who studies populations, and they look at individuals within the populations and what categories they fit into. The largest demographic study that you might be familiar with would be the United States Census. That's a demographic study where they're looking at how many individuals are in a certain area. They're looking at gender, level of education, age, stuff like that. Okay, all of that is part of that demographic study. When a biologist does this, they might be looking at things like age and gender, stuff like that as well. Now, when you're doing a demographic study and you're looking at a whole population, you can look at several things. First of all, there's population density. This is a value that's calculated. So you're looking at an amount of individuals divided by the area. So you're going to get a measurement like 20 people per square mile, 30 deer per acre, or something like that. Okay, and I've been putting people here because when you're doing your demographic study, you're going to be looking at people, and we're going to be talking about the human population, but understand you can use this for any population, including bacteria in a lab. Okay. Dispersion is not calculated, but it's usually plotted on a map. Okay, so that's where in an area you're going to find them. So you'd take a map and you'd plot points for where you'd find the individuals. Is that 30 people per square mile all crammed together in one neighborhood in the middle, or are they spread out evenly, and so on? Then there are some other helpful things that you can calculate, and one of those is the birth rate, and birth rate is the number born divided by total population. Death rate, or also called mortality, is the number that died divided by total population. Okay. These two values can go together to calculate the growth rate. Okay. The growth rate is the birth rate minus the death rate. If this value is negative, what that means is that your death rate must be higher than your birth rate, meaning you're removing more individuals than are being put in by birth. So your population is in decline. Okay. If your growth rate is positive, it means you've got more born than are dying, which means your population is growing. If this is at 0, that means these two values are equal, and that means your population is stable. So you can get some pretty good information to make some predictions about populations using this value. All right, the next thing is the survivorship curve, and this is kind of a frozen moment in time, and I'm going to show it to you on the next slide. All right, so here are survivorship curves, and there are 3 survivorship curves on this same graph. So, like I said, this is a frozen moment in time looking at the number of individuals and their ages. Age is often percent of lifespan, okay? So if you look down here, instead of age, it says what percent of their life have they lived. That's kind of looking at age a different way. But what we're doing is saying, at this second, if we looked right now and we got a count of how many individuals, number of individuals in the population are at different ages, okay, this is what you'd see. All right, now there are 3 types of survivorship. The first is type 1, which is what you see here in green, okay? Notice that you're more likely to live at low ages, okay? And then there's this critical point where all of a sudden the rate at which the individual stops surviving increases. In other words, you have fewer and fewer individuals at high ages, okay? So this is low infant mortality. You've got a bunch of individuals living at young ages, but then at old age, you start to see them dropping off. That's what humans do. Type 2 survivorship is this one here where it's a constant mortality. You're no more likely to die here than you are here, okay? Notice the slope of this line doesn't change. That means that it's constant, okay? The last type is type 3. And notice that you see a huge decline here early, and that's high infant mortality. But then there's a point where if you can make it past a certain age, you're less likely. Notice the slope of the line changes and gets shallower. You survive and survive and survive and survive. So this is kind of the opposite of what humans do. A lot of plants will do this, where you put out a bunch of seeds, but only a few of them actually survive and become adult plants. But those are the 3 types of survivorship curves. And by the way, I forgot to tell you, any graphic that you see here that we discuss is going to be important for the EOC. The EOC loves graphs, and they will use any kinds of graphs like this in their questions. So you really want to make sure you understand any graphs that you're seeing. Okay, so make sure you're asking questions if you're not understanding graphs. All right, last thing for this lesson. When you are looking at individuals in populations, so the stuff that we did before was about whole populations, but now if you're looking at individuals in the populations, you can look at a couple things. You can look at life expectancy, and that's exactly what it sounds like. How long is an individual in this population expected to live? Okay. You can look up their life expectancy tables online. And you'll notice also there's been a lot of discussion. We kind of circled back to what we talked about when we started this course about the fact that your generation is actually the first that's expected to have a lower life expectancy than that of your parents, and that's because of the obesity crisis, right? But at any rate, that's life expectancy. You also have immigration and emigration. Immigration with an I means in, okay? People moving into a population. Emigration with an E, I always think of as exit, okay? And that's people moving out of a population. So immigration and emigration are kind of messy because they're hard to predict. And so demographers have a hard time with these because, especially if you're studying, say, deer in the woods, it's hard to predict how many of them are going to move in and out of populations. You could actually ask people if they intend to move, right? But you can't ask deer. So immigration and emigration can make population studies a little tricky because you never know how to predict them very well. At any rate, that gives you a good introduction. In the next lesson, we'll talk about growth models and do some more graphics looking at age structure and so on.